Al Capone. A name that was capable of striking fear in the hearts of every man, woman, and child in the 1920s. Or as he was equally known as, Scarface. Considered by some to be the most evil man in history, Al Capone and his men are credited for the illegal activities that have given Chicago the reputation of a lawless city. In his career, Capone was responsible for countless murders, and some of his most famous assassinations were related to treachery within his own mob. He is also notorious for being one of the leading men in the business of bootlegging of alcohol during the era of Prohibition. Contrastly, Capone is also recognized as one of the biggest allies to the needy of America. His generous donations and actions to some have since given him a Robin Hood reputation in addition to his notoriety as a murderous gangster. Alphonse Capone was born on January 17, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrants Teresina and Gabriele Capone. His parents were perfectly respectable residents, and there was never evidence to imply that their children would grow up to be anything other than decent. Ironically, all the children grew up to be criminals. At the age of 14, Capone dropped out of 6th grade after an incident in which he slapped his teacher. He joined small-time gangs, then moved on to more powerful groups such as the Brooklyn Rippers and then the 5 Points Gang. He was employed by Frankie Yale, a Coney Island bartender, in a saloon called the Harvard Inn. It was during his employment at a Brooklyn nightclub that he earned his nickname Scarface. Capone inadvertently insulted a woman with a crude comment and was then attacked by the woman's brother, who sliced him on the left side of his face 3 times. Capone despised this nickname and often hid his scars by covering it with powder, and preferred to be photographed from the right side. Capone married May Josephine Coughlin in December of 1918, a month after the couple had given birth to their first son, Albert Francis Capone. During his late teens, Capone was noticed by gangster Johnny Torrio, who would become his mentor and business partner. In 1920, Capone moved to Chicago at the invitation of Torrio. Capone started out as a bouncer, bartender, but rose to become an influential lieutenant in the Colosimo mob. The mob fed off the public's disobedience to the Prohibition Amendment and participated in the illegal brewing, distilling, and distribution of beer and liquor. The Colosimo mob's leader at the time was Big Jim Colosimo. Torrio wished for Big Jim to be out of the picture and put Capone in charge of the plan. Capone hired former employee Frankie Yale to complete the job. The execution of the murder would set the trademark for Capone's style: planned, deliberate, and witnesses who developed sudden amnesia. As the new gang leader, Torrio and Capone set up about 160 gambling joints and 120 saloons. In 1925, Capone became the mob's boss when Torrio was injured in an assassination attempt. Torrio returned to Brooklyn and left the gang to Capone. Capone did not like to be considered a criminal, instead preferring to be known as a gentleman. Capone was not solely a feared man. He additionally gained people's trust by being a very charitable and altruistic man. He often donated generous amounts to charities, with money he had earned through illegal means. He was renowned for giving munificent tips to waiters, and even more popular for handing out coal and garments to the underprivileged during the winter. Capone even initiated some of the nation's earliest soup kitchens during the Great Depression. Many who met Capone did not wish to believe that Capone was a bad man, instead preferring to think of him as kind and generous.
Oh, sure, I met him. He was a very nice person, as to know him, you know. And what they said, he never did anything. It was his people that did it, like his men that he had or whatever.
But as the legacy of Al Capone goes, he was indeed a nefarious man. Capone rarely ever was the one who carried out the murders. He instead liked to orchestrate the entire situation and watch from the sidelines, keeping his hands clean. It is estimated that Capone himself killed dozens of people and ordered a hit on hundreds others. One such example of Capone handling things personally occurred in the spring of 1929. Capone had learned that 3 of his associates planned to betray him, so he invited all 3 to a huge banquet. After the 3 unsuspecting men had eaten heartily and drank their fill, Capone's bodyguards quickly tied them to their chairs. Capone then picked up a baseball bat and began hitting them, breaking bone after bone. When Capone was done with them, the 3 men were shot in the head and their bodies dumped out of town. These murders were putting Capone under more police pressure, and he was now a severely wanted man who had protection everywhere he went. His headquarters contained secret passageways for them to get in and out without anyone noticing. Capone had more security than President Calvin Coolidge. The most famous extermination at the hands of Capone was the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The target was Bugs Moran, a rival gang leader whom Capone wished to rid of once and for all. On the day of the incident, several of Capone's men entered one of Moran's warehouses, 2 of them dressed as policemen. 7 of Moran's men were there and, believing it was a raid, turned to the wall and put their hands up. All 7 men were immediately mowed down with 150 bullets. Capone was accused of the attack but possessed an airtight alibi which proved he was in a meeting with the Florida district attorney at the time. Nobody was willing to testify against Capone, and the case was closed. Capone's first jail stint occurred in May of 1929 when he and his bodyguard were arrested in Philadelphia for carrying concealed deadly weapons. Capone was sentenced to a year in jail but only served 9 months, after being released for good behavior. In late 1931, Capone was found guilty of tax evasion and was sentenced 11 years in federal prison and fined over $273,000.
Capone was sentenced to 11 years behind bars, the stiffest penalty of any tax case to date.
It's safe to assume that Capone never expected to be convicted, or if he was convicted, he expected to spend perhaps a year or 2 in jail, not 10 or 11 years.
As he left court, he looked to the photographers and said, "Get enough, boys. You won't be seeing me for a long time."
Capone was moved from prison to prison until August of 1934, when Capone was sent to Alcatraz. Capone was released after 7 years, having paid all debts. However, that was the end of the gangster-related activities of the mob boss. Capone's health had severely deteriorated in jail and he retreated to his Florida home. Capone was diagnosed in 1946 of having the mentality of a 12-year-old child. Capone remained in his home with his wife and immediate family until his passing on January 25, 1947 due to cardiac arrest. Capone is to this day seen as an icon of the crime era of the 1920s, albeit an evil one. There has since been several media portrayals of Capone, including The Untouchables, Al Capone, Scarface, and Boardwalk Empire.
But I get nowhere unless the team wins.
Team. Oh, Jesus Christ.
This is the true shocking story of Scarface Al Capone, who stalked out of Chicago to take America by the throat.
Anybody gives you any trouble, anybody gives you back door, you tell them come see Al. They gotta see Al Capone.
Scarface. In the 1920s, the United States was reeling under the impact of prohibition. The sale of whiskey, wine, and beer was prohibited by law, but there were many willing to break that law. Gangsters took over. Crime flourished. Mobs fought each other for prime territories.
Come on, hit me. Come on. Hit me. Come on, tough guy, hit me. Come on. What was that, huh? Come on, hit me harder. What was that? Harder than that. Come on, put your hands up. Put your hands up. Put your hands up. Put both like this in front of your face. In front of your face. Like this. Okay? You gotta throw your punch. You gotta throw your punch like bang! Come on, let me see what you got. Come on. Come on! Hit me! You gotta hit me. You let people bully you? Huh? Come on and hit me, huh?
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I got one. How come you're wearing a dress?
This is not a dress, this is a tunic. It was the height of fashion 3,000 years ago, I assure you. Are there any other questions?